Hi! Before we get started, some spoilers for these games. Watch at your own risk. Video games have, in the last 10 years or so, become an instrumental part of culture, adopted by the public in a way the early adopters, i.e. nerds, of the 90s and 2000s could never have seen coming. Hundreds of thousands of people tune into esports events, gaming YouTubers, and streamers consistently, and the internet has quickly become a cesspool of people arguing about how actually you are wrong, and Dark Souls is not the greatest game of the century because Mario Tennis Advance Tour exists. A massive number of people began being interested in video games during the COVID pandemic whilst being stuck in their homes. They saw that, hey, this is actually pretty fun, and stopped bullying their geeky peers, because who else is going to teach them to be good at League of Legends? I was able to reconnect with a lot of people I knew years ago through them picking up online gaming during the pandemic. And all this makes sense, because the goal of video games is to be fun, right? I mean, some of the brutally difficult games are still fun, and even something with a reputation like Dark Souls is designed in a way that with enough perseverance, anyone can get through them. So of course we can say video games should be fun. Or so I thought. But I've recently stumbled on a few games that resist this precedent, opting instead to make a point through how truly unfun they can be. And oddly, I feel like this works in their favor artistically sometimes. While I've seen individual analyses of these games, rarely have I seen any mentions of their similarities. With this video, I'm going to propose that this hostility toward a player for art purposes actually represents a subgenre, or at least a category I've never seen named before. So I'm going to do it. I'm calling them European pain games. Video games, to no one's surprise, are made up of a wide variety of parts, often produced by people in different areas of expertise. One team writes the story, another puts together sound design, system designers plan and balance mechanics, etc. When directed well enough, or when produced by very small teams, these aspects can come together to make a whole worth more than the sum of their parts. I especially believe in the potential when mechanics are planned specifically to support the narrative at play. In a chapter written by Alex Mitchell of the National University of Singapore, Game Mechanics as Narrative Mode, the author speaks on how the different aspects of a game come together to form a story experience. More specifically, he speaks on how mechanics can fit into the game's narrative experience when the developers do not think of the story and gameplay experiences as strictly separate. He describes a few methods of blending mechanical design with narrative, but the one I want you to focus on is called Poetic gameplay, which Mitchell describes as such. The details of the game mechanics deliberately undermine player expectations to foreground certain aspects of the game experience and connect these elements to the unfolding narrative. An example of this at play would be in Baldur's Gate 3. Throughout the game, the player must succeed skill checks with a die roll, something anyone familiar with D&D will understand. You have to roll high enough to match or exceed the requirement listed. Based on your stats, you can receive bonuses to these rolls, increasing your chance of passing the check with a favorable outcome. In the final section of the game, you are given a check that looks like this. The die only goes up to 20, by the way. You can technically pass this check with a pre-bonus 20 roll, as natural 20s, as they are called, pass everything, but any stat bonuses you've gained over the course of the game won't help you. You're basically intended to fail this check 95% of the time. So why is it here? Because this creates a comparison in the player's mind regarding the enemy's strength versus all of the other threats you faced in the past. Up to that point in the game, the player has seen roll requirements of 15, 20, even up to 30, but no other check comes even close to a 99 difficulty, driving home that this final threat you face is strong beyond any comprehension. This also creates doubt of your preparedness, even though you are more than likely max level at this point, with your party sporting multiple pieces of legendary gear. I personally wasn't scared because my wizard had a secret weapon. Testicular torsion! While poetic gameplay is core to the other games I will be discussing today, I look for it to be used in a pretty specific way. More on this later. For now, let's take a look at a few games that fit my criteria and note what's common between them. Pathologic is perhaps the most true example of a European pain game. Set in the early 20th century in a small village in the European steppes, you play one of three characters attempting to save the town from an incoming plague, while being foiled at every turn by local politics, backwards traditions, and the playable characters you didn't choose. It's one of the densest pieces of text ever, so I won't go too in detail for the plot. Go look at H-Bomberbear's video on Pathologic if you want more context. I'll be mentioning some of the points he brings up as well. Yoink! You arrive at the town at the beginning of the game before the plague hits, but your character has some idea that it is coming. Pathologic operates on a day structure, requiring you to accomplish a list of tasks across the town before night. You're on a strict time limit, but notably, if you don't finish everything, you aren't hit with a game over. Instead, other characters must pick up your slack, typically doing a worse job than you could have, and catching the plague in the process. You've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get moving. Oh, you can't sprint. Pathologic is a true walking simulator. It's mind-numbing, and at the same time stressful, as you have massive amounts of ground to cover if you want to finish all your goals in time. To pair with this, the state of the town gets exponentially worse with each passing day. On the second day, the greater population recognizes the tragedy incoming, and everyone stockpiles resources. What this means for the player is that prices tenfold at the local shops. Keep in mind that you have to handle hunger constantly in this game, so while a local politician gives you a gun shortly into the game, you may have to sell it immediately after to handle your rapidly increasing hunger. Ouch! The tasks and side quests are no better. Many RPGs reward you in the long run for making moral choices, either with increased XP or a better weapon stick. But Pathologic does the exact opposite. A quest early on requires you to purchase food for a local shelter, only to realize that 1, they didn't give you enough money for what they need you to buy, and 2, the destination for the food is already fucked. If you go through all of this and return to the quest giver with the food, she takes it and you get... Or, you could run off with the money or food once you realize the destination has already been taken by the plague, at the cost of your real-life soul dying. Shame on you. Shame! All this happens while developer insert characters mock you when things get worse. My main takeaways for you are as such. Themes of futility and despair, mechanics that pass these feelings directly onto the player, the game is not fun in the traditional sense, and the game is hostile to the player through its mechanics, as the environment is to your character in the story. Keep these in mind as we move through our other examples. Fear and Hunger is a horror game made in RPG Maker, in which the player must enter the mythical dungeons of Fear and Hunger, with the goal of rescuing a prominent general from captivity. These dungeons are no longer manned by sane guards, instead filled with eldritch horrors and hulking massives that may have once been human.
What the hell is even that?
Very little guidance is given to the player, and pressure is placed immediately, but not just through a hunger bar. Once you spawn in, you'll be assaulted by rabid dogs in less than 2 minutes, unless you immediately seek shelter in the dungeon, setting the tone for the rest of the game. Monsters you encounter will frequently leave you maimed, either losing some or all of your limbs and potentially becoming infected, forcing you to find a cure before you drop dead. Fear and Hunger rarely lets you feel safe, with even its save points staking your life on the literal coin flips. Just as often will a mistake kill you as put your character in terrible, unrecoverable situations. You may end up in a flesh pit with all your limbs cut off, and if you die to certain enemies, they may do things to you I can't show here. On a serious note, while this adds to the theming in the game in some ways, I question how necessary this specific choice is due to its potential to alienate a large group of players. Be wary of this conclusion if you choose to play Fear and Hunger for yourself. Much like Fear and Hunger, you're required to make extremely difficult choices for your own survival, often with no idea of the lasting consequences of those choices. For example, early on, you can save a young girl locked in a cage, who becomes a very weak party member. But not to worry, not only is she a party member, but also a currency. A couple of monsters you meet in the dungeons will not attack you, but if you have the girl with you, will offer to take her off your hands? One offers you a variety of valuable rewards to choose from, while the other just straight up fucking eats her in front of you, giving you nothing in return. Great! Fear and Hunger has become a very hot topic of discussion here on YouTube for its wanton displays of atrocities, often untouched by other games that are already considered brutal, as well as its deep, intriguing, dark fantasy lore and world building. Some may say the inclusions of things like sexual violence and trafficking trivializes real-world violence and brutality. As I primarily intend to look at how the gameplay mirrors the narrative, I will not be focusing on the ethics of these inclusions further here, but I must warn you of what to expect should you choose to experience this game for yourself. Regardless, what Fear and Hunger does do very well is channeling your survival instincts, forcing you to make terrible and selfish choices for the sake of short-term survival. Should I let my party member die to save resources for myself? Should I save the girl, or will my morals lead to a quick death? At all times, you feel hopelessly underpowered for the situation, and at any time you could be ruined by a basic enemy taking your arms off. Our previous example, Pathologic, is already a very gloomy game, but Fear and Hunger cranks up the brutality. It does not use boredom as a storytelling tool as much as Pathologic does. Instead, Fear and Hunger forces you to make decisions with little idea of the consequences, requiring lots of trial and error to understand the path to success. You never truly feel strong in Fear and Hunger, and if you do, chances are you've made some reprehensible choices, or there's a consequence coming you don't quite understand yet. Despite this, some similarities can be seen. Both games have themes of futility and despair, mechanics that pass these feelings on to the player. The game is not often fun, instead it can be frustrating, and mechanics that elicit a sense of hostility, mirroring the world's hostility in the lore. But both of these could still be contained in the horror genre, just with some unique ideas about player choice. So I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Please hold.
Alright, bear with me. If you've heard of this game already, you may be confused about its inclusion. Kentucky Route Zero is a story game, and in some ways can only barely be called a game. You do control the characters, you do make choices, but almost none of your choices affect the outcome. Instead, you get to choose things like, what is this character watching on TV tonight? Riveting! At times, the writing is incredibly powerful, but God can it be tedious. It can be frustrating having no choice in the events unfolding, especially when a character you once controlled is clearly making terrible choices, or when you're forced to participate in these choices with no option to avoid them. On top of this, much of the plot is shrouded in unclear metaphor. In many ways, it's written like great American literature, spending large swaths of time describing seemingly inconsequential details, or long conversations with characters you will never see again, with seemingly little relevance to the plot at hand. But this is one of my favorite games of all time. It really is. Because although Kentucky Route Zero is not a fun game, its design is spectacularly consistent with the points it intends to make. At its core, KRZ is a game about futility, but a different type of futility. Where the protagonists of the other two games I've mentioned were relegated to watch society collapse or to watch themselves collapse, many of the characters in Kentucky Route Zero are relegated to watch their lives pass by without purpose, or be absorbed in a project that no one cares about outside of themselves. They are powerless, or at least feel powerless, to save themselves. Not from physical harm, mind you, but from an overwhelming boredom, apathy, and isolation to the outside world created by their extremely remote setting. Those long, pointless conversations with one-off characters are boring because they probably bore the character you're playing as well. Now don't get me wrong, the writing can lead you to many interesting and deep places, not to mention surprising moments. And practically no character is one-dimensional. They talk so much because they probably haven't had a visitor in weeks. Many people you meet during the plot are worn out, melancholic for times long past, and woefully desensitized to the strange setting of the titular Route Zero. If not that, they instead have a deep inner world that the player is granted a short glimpse into. Animations are slow, and although dialogue can be skipped through, it isn't very quick. Life on the Zero is slow too. Viewed as a whole, Kentucky Route Zero uses its mechanics, or somewhat lack thereof, to build an atmosphere that hangs over you like one of those cartoon clouds that rains directly on your head. The game ends hopeful, but you still feel for the one-off characters you left behind, for which your character's encounter with them was only a blip of excitement in a menial existence. So let's see how this compares to our other examples. Themes of futility and despair. Check. Mechanics that pass these feelings on to the player. Check. Game is often not fun. Check, although maybe it depends on your definition of fun. The game is as hostile to the player as the environment is to the characters. Notably, this works a bit different from the other examples. The main characters encounter monuments to violence from long ago, but are never placed in physical danger themselves. As a result, the mechanics don't place the player in danger either. Instead, the limited player agency combined with deliberate pacing moves the game between immersive storytelling and creating a growing sense of apathy in the player, mirroring the feelings of the denizens of the Zero. With the game's similarities in its writing to great American literature, and the small differences between this and the other games I've presented here today, maybe this could be called the Great American Pain game. But for the sake of cohesion, I'm just gonna lump it in. Work with me here a little. Okay, so in talking about player hostility, there's a couple games I couldn't stop myself from talking about to some degree, even if they don't align exactly with the requirements I've laid out in this video. Molina is a game I bought and played pretty recently, and I've spent a lot of time watching streamer Greyfruit play it. He's pretty good at it, you should go check him out. This game describes itself on its Steam page as aggressively random and a hostile interpretation of immersive sim design. Interesting. The concept is simple. You're this guy. Grab all the fruit before finishing the level at the portal. The levels are handmade, with more on the Steam Workshop. But where the randomness comes in is in your tools. The game has a long list of physics tools, of which you are giving a random 3 in each level. In addition, the exit portal location is randomized, along with other obstacles such as a spinning spike ball, or a turtle that must stay on the screen for the level to be finishable. The aforementioned player hostility comes from the lack of safeguards. Molina does not guarantee that its levels are able to be completed at all. Like Solitaire, some configurations are simply impossible. However, the surrounding design of the game supports this decision, as the primary way of playing the game hands you 9 levels at a time, and if you fail one, it moves you on to the next, allowing you to loop back and take on the ones you failed a bit later with a new set of tools. Additionally, there's a dedicated give up button, saving you time when you recognize the situation cannot be solved. You're not punished for receiving an impossible configuration, as the game keeps the pace very quick and encourages you to mess around with each tool's capabilities. Once you understand how to use each tool provided to you, some levels that once appeared impossible will become doable, which I find to be an incredibly rewarding gameplay loop. Despite the game's self-described hostile design, this is clearly not a European Pain game for the same reason Solitaire is not. The incompatible levels are not in service of some grand meaning behind the game, apart from maybe some implications to be drawn about game design conventions in general. Fun is seldom sacrificed in receiving an impossible configuration, and in fact, it feels rewarding to learn when levels are indeed impossible, and even more rewarding when you recognize you're actually able to complete one you once would have considered impossible. Molina doesn't coddle the player, but also isn't aiming to lead you to a grand realization about the plot or life through its quote-unquote hostility. Very neat game regardless. It's only about $5 on Steam, so worth trying if you want a quick distraction. My other honorable mention is actually kind of a category in itself, as I'm talking about rage games. You may have heard of Kaizo Mario, I Want to Be the Guy, or its sequel, I Want to Be the Boshi. While again an example of design that is openly hostile towards the player, again, this does not fit the category I laid out in the initial section of this video. They can be extremely frustrating, and they require a large amount of trial and error. But yet again, this is not in service of a narrative point to be made. I've also heard these games described as anti-games, for the way they actively choose the opposite of rewarding game design, requiring the player to build up a knowledge of all the traps in each level through constant trial and error. It is important to note that designing a good anti-game often requires robust knowledge of game design, funnily enough, so you know what not to do. However, this is in service of the satisfaction found in persevering through the whole thing, seen by many as a trial of wits and patience. This reward, and the novelty in the absurd tricks many of these games pull to kill the player, are what makes these games engaging in my eyes. But I do not believe these decisions to be in service of the games as a form of art, rather than pure entertainment. This is not a knock against these games. They're obviously popular for a reason, but it's definitely not an EPG. With these examples, I put forward the genre, or at least category, of games that I call European Pain games. I call them this due to the European origins of two of the main examples I've listed, the games that inspired me to make this video. Because of these games' proclivity to make use of mechanics that intentionally make the experience less fun for the player in service of the message the developers are attempting to communicate, the experience is deepened, and overall far more impactful from a narrative perspective. In short, a European Pain game, or EPG, is a game that exploits the player's psychological response to the mechanics at play, trading fun for greater immersion, syncing the player's feelings to some extent with the role their character fills in the plot. Do I expect anything to come out of classifying these games as such? Not really. I feel there can be a pervasive sense that games should be fun, even though games have been more or less accepted as an art form. But video games have the potential to evoke real emotions and produce complex evaluations of the human experience, even with cases where fun and satisfaction may be sacrificed in the service of the greater picture. Now, this doesn't mean that games should be less fun in general. Rather than I wish to recognize games as art are in a position to take risks and break rules core to the traditional gaming experience, provided the player understands to some extent what they're getting into. I applaud the risks taken by these developers in delivering games that are more than just entertainment. Although there's nothing wrong with games as entertainment as well. I imagine people who play Call of Duty as their main game would not be interested in dealing with pathologic, extremely slow walking. Or at least until they patch an attack sprint. Are there any other examples you think would fit in? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Hi, I'm Jay Cracer, armchair game scholar with way too strong of opinions. If you made it this far, I really do appreciate it. This is my first video following my thesis video, Parries Everywhere, which got the bare minimum attention for my head to grow 3 sizes too big. So if you like this, you might like that video as well. Throw me a comment with any feedback, and I'd appreciate a like and subscribe if you want to help me grow my head even larger. Maybe I'll make some more videos, so keep an eye out. Thanks.